Hi folks, Dr. Robert Barrington here with some more nutrition advice. Now this video is going to be about tea. I've done a number of videos on tea, but I wanted to have a look in particular in this video at the carotenoid content of tea and how this can affect firstly the general health effects and secondly how this can affect the mental health effects of different types of tea. Now tea is known to be a healthy drink. There have been many studies that looked at the health effects of tea, and tea has been shown to have health effects because of the antioxidants that it contains. That's not the only reason, but the antioxidant phytochemicals within tea have been shown to provide beneficial health effects. Now in green tea is made from the dried leaves of the Camellia sinensis plant. Green tea contains high amounts of catechins, and they're the antioxidants that are in high amounts in green tea. And white tea is a very similar product to green tea, it just uses younger leaves. So both of those types of tea are very high in the catechins, and these are a form of flavonoid. And these catechins have been shown to have very good, they're very bioactive, they're absorbed into human tissues, and they have antioxidant effects. Black tea is slightly different because the Camellia sinensis plant leaves are first dried, and then they go through a process called fermentation, which is not a true fermentation step, it's actually an oxidation step, and this causes the leaves to be effectively burnt and they become black, and this is the production of black tea. And black tea has a very different taste to green tea, and this is because many of the phytochemicals are altered during this oxidation, or what we call fermentation stage. But that doesn't mean that black tea isn't just as healthy, because many of the products that are produced during this oxidation are actually beneficial to the health. And this video is going to look at carotenoids and the difference between the carotenoid content of green and white tea and that of black tea, and how that affects the health effects. So carotenoids are present in tea. This is not often talked about, the other antioxidants that are in tea, because catechins are so often the source of the information that we have about antioxidants. But tea leaves contain other antioxidants. They contain vitamin C, they contain vitamin E, and they also contain carotenoids, which is common to most plants. Nearly all plants use carotenoids as a photosynthetic accessory to chlorophyll, and therefore any plant tissue will contain various amounts of different carotenoids. Now the carotenoids that are in tea, there are a wide range of carotenoids, but studies have shown that there are particularly 4 types of carotenoids in native tea leaves, in untreated tea leaves, and they're beta-carotene, which is a carotene, and then we've got some xanthophylls, and the xanthophylls are lutein, and we've got neoxanthine, and we've got violaxanthin. Now there are other carotenoids, but the studies that I've looked at seem to cite those as being the most numerous of the carotenoids. So there are 2 different types of carotenoids there. We've got the carotene, beta-carotene, and we've got the xanthophylls, which are effectively very similar to the carotenoids, but they also contain an oxygen molecule. But lumped together, those molecules are known as carotenoids. Now carotenoids are important antioxidants. They are bioavailable in humans, and they actually work in a very similar way in human tissue as they do in plants, which means that they're very good at being antioxidants, which is one of the reasons that they are associated with the photosynthetic machinery in plants, because plants are exposed to the sun. The sun generates a lot of free radicals during the photosynthetic process, and the plant has to have a way to mop up all of those free radicals, and one of the compounds that it uses is carotenoids. And when we absorb the carotenoids, they go into our tissues and they do a very similar job. And carotenoids are particularly interesting because they're fat soluble, so they tend to collect in our cell membranes. Now that's very interesting from a mental health point of view, because our brains are made largely of fat, and therefore if carotenoids are fat soluble, you would expect carotenoids to be particularly beneficial to mental health. And it's strange, but studies haven't looked at the carotenoids as much as they have, for example, of the flavonoids or some of the water-soluble phytochemicals in plants. But those studies that have looked at carotenoids and their effects on mental health have shown that actually, yes, they do have beneficial effects at protecting from depression and anxiety. Now, most of those studies, this is the caveat, most of those studies have been done on animals, but animal models are quite reliable in this, in this use. It'd be nice, hopefully, if in the future somebody could do some more large-scale studies on humans. But the data that is there, that's in the scientific literature, suggests that carotenoids are protective of mental health. For example, some of the xanthophylls, such as astaxanthin, cryptoxanthin, zeaxanthin, they've been shown in animal models to be protective of depression and anxiety. And the mechanism is quite well established that generally antioxidants that get into the brain tend to have this protective effect, because one of the downstream effects of stress is the generation of free radicals and inflammation, and that inflammation and free radical generation is thought to be one of the drivers of the development of mental illness. So it's no surprise that carotenoids have this beneficial effect, and carotenoids are found in tea, which might be one of the reasons that many studies have found that drinking tea consumption is actually beneficial to protection against anxiety and depression. So carotenoids are present in tea leaves. It's not often talked about, so it's worth mentioning that that's another reason why tea is a healthy drink. They are at quite low levels, so for example, one study found 0.05% of the dry weight of the tea leaf was various carotenoids. Now, what I've mentioned so far is true for green tea and white tea. Now, green tea and white tea are pretty unprocessed. The leaves are simply dried and then they are packaged and then you put them in hot water, and therefore whatever is in the tea leaf is generally going to be in your tea, as long as it's water soluble, or as long as it gets out of the leaf and into the water. It doesn't have to be soluble really in the water, because carotenoids obviously aren't, but there are a lot of things suspended in the water, but it has to get into that water for you to be able to drink it. And anything really in the leaf that can get out of the leaf, can get into the water, will be consumed, and carotenoids are absorbed from tea. That's been shown. So that's green tea. It does contain, they do contain carotenoids. Now, during the processing of black tea, there's, like I say, there's this oxidation step. Now, this oxidation step is very important for the taste of the black tea. And if you're a tea manufacturer and you know how to, select your leaf, and you know about the oxidation of leaves, you can actually change the taste of your black tea by changing this oxidation step. If you elongate it slightly, you get a different taste than if you have a shorter oxidation step, for example. The reason for that is that this oxidation, which is effectively burning the leaves, really creates a lot of degradation products from the phytochemicals that are normally in the leaf. And I think this is originally why black tea was probably thought of as not being so healthy as green tea. But what it turns out that many of the degradation products of this oxidation step may actually have their own health effects anyway. I've talked before about theorubigens, theoflavins. They are oxidation products of the catechins that we find in the green tea, and they have been shown to have health effects. Now, the carotenoids are also degraded during the oxidation step. So the amount of carotenoids that you get in black tea is much lower than you get in green and white tea. So we get about 0.05% dry weight of carotenoids in green tea, but in black tea we only get about half that, so 0.025%. So some of the carotenoids have been degraded to other chemicals. So the first thing to say is that black tea has much lower levels of carotenoids than green tea. So if you are trying to take in higher amounts of carotenoids, clearly the tea that you should be drinking is green or white tea. and that would supply more carotenoids. But that doesn't mean that that's necessarily going to improve your health more, because it's not exactly clear what these chemicals are, what these carotenoids are degraded to. There are all sorts of very complex mixtures of chemicals in black tea. The black teas have not been fully characterized, but there are studies that have looked at black tea and found health effects for black tea, and this may relate to the fact that some of these degradation products, and certainly, like I say, theorubigens and theaflavins are degradation products of the catechins, and they've been shown to have beneficial effects. Now, if the carotenoid content of black tea is lower than green tea, it stands to reason that the vitamin A content of black tea will also be lower, and that's because some of the carotenoids, for example beta-carotene, is able to be converted to vitamin A when we absorb it. Now, that's not the case for all carotenoids. The xanthophylls are generally not converted to vitamin A, as far as we're aware, and not all of the carotenes are either, but beta-carotene is present in the leaves of green tea, and that would be converted to vitamin A. So the vitamin A content, or the potential vitamin A content in black tea, will also be lower than in green tea. But what you find in black tea is some of these degradation products that aren't present in green tea. Now, it's not exactly clear how these carotenoids are degraded during this oxidation step, because, like I say, the chemistry of it is very complex. But a number of compounds are classed as degradation products of the catechins, of the carotenoids in tea. Ionine is one of them, and there's a series of compounds called the ionine compounds, and these are found in black tea. And there is another compound called linalool, which is also found in black tea. Now, these compounds, the health effects of these compounds have not been fully established, but linalool has definitely been established as being anxiolytic. In other words, it has anti-anxiety effects. So it might be that the ionine compounds also have beneficial effects. But what these compounds do, and what has been quite widely studied in chemistry papers, is that they do add to the taste of black tea. So these ionine compounds, these series of ionine compounds, which are degradation products of the carotenoids and linalool, are some of the compounds in the black tea that provide the aroma that you associate with black tea. So carotenoids in the tea leaves are actually very important in black tea manufacture, because they give the taste, the aroma, the smell, and anyone that's drunk a variety of different black teas knows that no black tea variety tastes the same. It's very easy to make black teas of different have different aromas, and this is one of the reasons of that, is because the catechins are because the carotenoids are degraded. The catechins are degraded as well. They're degraded to theorubigens and theaflavins, and they too have also been chemically analysed and been shown to be required for this black tea taste. So if you enjoy the taste of black tea, and I admit it is black tea is much more refreshing, I think, than green tea. That refreshing aroma, that refreshing taste, is very unique to black tea. You can smell it long before you drink the tea. That is some of the compounds that are responsible for that are the breakdown products of the antioxidants that we associate with great health effects in the green and white teas. Now, if we compare green and I've done this before in other videos, but if we compare the health effects of green and white tea, the kind of the unprocessed teas, with that of black tea, many people do assume that green tea has better health effects, and I don't think the scientific evidence really supports that. I think both teas have been shown to be very effective at supporting optimal health. They're both very healthy drinks for different reasons. They both have very high antioxidant content. Black tea does still contain catechins, it does still contain some carotenoids, but also has these degradation products as well. So they're both very high in antioxidants. It's just that the antioxidant profiles of both teas differ slightly, and that's why you get the different tastes and you get the different aromas from the two teas. But really, when we compare them, they're both very good at protecting from physical and mental degeneration of our bodies. And lastly, if we just have a look at the mental health effects of tea, Many studies have looked at not just tea but also coffee, and when I'm talking about coffee I'm really talking about filter coffee, not instant coffee. And both tea and coffee appear to be protective of mood disorders. It's a bit of a generalization, but if you have a look through the scientific literature, coffee appears to be more protective of depression, whereas tea appears to be more protective of anxiety. And I would suggest, and this is just my opinion, that the reason that coffee is protective of depression is possibly because it has more of a stimulating effect on the catecholamines in the brain, the catecholamine pathways, which may ultimately produce more noradrenaline and dopamine, which may have antidepressant effects, whereas tea might be particularly beneficial against anxiety, not only because it's got good high antioxidant content, but also because it contains L-theanine, and L-theanine can increase the content of GABA in the brain, and GABA is a very good anti-anxiety compound. So that's my interpretation of the scientific literature. But certainly large-scale epidemiological studies that have been done on tea and coffee both support. There's very little evidence that either of those drinks are a cause of anxiety and depression, and really, if you look at the evidence as a whole, tea appears to be particularly effective against anxiety, and coffee appears to be particularly effective against depression. So tea, a good source of carotenoids. Green tea, good source of carotenoids. If you want to try, if you want to increase the vitamin A content of your diet, if you also want to increase the antioxidant content of your diet, there's nothing wrong with drinking tea. I find it's a very healthy drink. Certain people are caffeine sensitive and have to avoid tea and coffee, but if you're not caffeine sensitive, it's certainly a very good way to improve your health, your physical health and your mental health. So I hope you found that interesting. As always, eat well, stay healthy and protect yourself, and I will see you soon for another video. Take care.